Hello, everybody, and welcome to the place where you learn how to transform your sexuality, activate your superpowers, and cultivate self-love. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Xanet, and she is a sex and intimacy educator and coach, holistic pelvic care practitioner, SE trauma practitioner, which stands for somatic experiencing. And I also very privileged to read her book called Living an Orgasmic Life, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So welcome to the summit, Xanet.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here.
I so enjoyed your book. It is written well, it is entertaining, it is educating. There is a lot of case studies there. Seems like you have worked with a lot of women and you've got a well of knowledge and wisdom that you are here to share. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the book.
So tell me, what led you on this path?
Oh, well, like so many, healers, I was myself a wounded healer. I lived in a sexless marriage for over 26 years, which is a long time to be in a sexless marriage. It's not like we didn't have any sex at all because we had 2 children, but we certainly didn't have a lot of sex. And I used to blame it on my husband, my ex-husband now, but I realized, after doing my work that this was really my stuff. It was my issue. I had a lot of challenges with sex. I was very disconnected from my body. I had what I think we now call shame trauma. I had a number of things that happened to me that caused a tremendous amount of shame. And an incident when I was rather young, maybe I was around 8 years old, with my dog that I write about in the book, where he actually started licking my genitals, and it felt good for me. But I had so much anxiety about it because I knew it was so wrong, that from sort of that point on, I started associating pleasure, sexual pleasure, with fear and anxiety. And that made sex very anxiety ridden. I wasn't able to relax. I wasn't able to have an orgasm. I wasn't able to experience pleasure. And it also caused me to have vaginismus, which is this pretty common condition where the vagina, which is a muscle, just started closing up, which made sex very, very painful. And so I just decided after my second son was born to stop having sex with my husband. It wasn't like a super conscious decision, but I think it was the only decision that I could make. And it caused a lot of issues in the marriage. We, lost connection. There was no more intimacy. And ultimately we just became roommates, barely roommates. We were actually sleeping in separate rooms. Housemates, perhaps, would be a better way to say it. And when I finally left the marriage, and I was 50 years old when I left that marriage, I realized that I needed to take a hard look at what was going on with sex and sexuality for me. And that led me into this whole healing journey that I started down. And ultimately, I was a healthcare lawyer by training. I practiced in the corporate world for most of my professional life. And when this all happened, I realized that, no, I'm supposed to be doing something else with my life. And it has to do with helping women, specifically women, heal from all of the sexual wounds that have been imposed on us, either out of, never willfully, but, that have happened through society, through abuse, through physical trauma, through every other type of experience that a woman has had.
Right. And you went on an entire training after training modalities, right?
I did. I was crazed. And, being a lawyer by training, that's what I knew. I knew that I had to know it better. I had to have more skills. Had to have better tools. I needed to understand anatomy. I needed to understand trauma. And so I just went on this like really intense training journey, which was really, honestly, initially it was not about doing the work for others or helping others. It was my own journey. It was my own healing. You know, how do I get through these blocks that I have? Can I ever have an orgasm? Can I ever experience pleasure? These things that seem so incredibly elusive to me, and I felt so broken. And as I started to access those parts of me, and as I started to heal from my own wounds and my own shame, it just became clear that this was what I was supposed to do now in this stage of my life, that I was done doing law and I was done doing corporate, and that my mission was really to help spread the word about healing sexual wounds, and helping everyone understand that pleasure is our birthright, and also to help couples to prevent them from being in the place where I was, of living, you know, miserably in a sexless relationship for, you know, over 2 decades.
Right. Wow, that's amazing how you went into a personal healing journey, and on the way you first found your pleasure, right? And your orgasms, because you wrote this book, Living an Orgasmic Life.
Yes.
And I like that I'll quote you from that book, saying that if somebody would have told you that this is what you're going to do when you're 50, you would say that they must be on drugs or something, because that was so far away from your life at the time.
Yes,
which
so
is
true.
really inspiring for other women to, first of all, acknowledge that it's never too late. It's really a conscious choice to make to go through that journey. And it's so empowering on so many levels that it's really way more than just pleasure and sexuality, right? It's activating your life force energy.
Yes, yes, very much so. I mean, what I realized, unbeknownst to me, was that when I was able to start to really connect with my sexuality, I was able to actually just really be a different person, have this, you know, huge surge of creativity that came through me, which was in writing the book and in starting the blog and deciding I was going to become an entrepreneur. Like, I never could have conceived of doing any of that. And all of that was really as a result of me being able to tap into that life force energy that lives in our pelvic bowl, right? You know, Naomi Wolf says, you know, that a woman's vagina is the center of her creativity and her power. And I never understood that until one day I realized I was kind of deep into this work. I just started my business. I'd moved to California, and things were just happening at such a rapid pace. And I was like, I get it. I get it. Now that I'm really tapped into this, my life is just unfolding because I have access to this whole force that I didn't even know existed.
Right, right. And I would really love to hear from you about the pelvic work, and what do you do? What is a pelvic care practitioner?
Yeah, so I'm a holistic pelvic care practitioner, and the whole modality of holistic pelvic care was created by Tammy Lynn Kent, who lives in Portland, Oregon. She's amazing. She is a pelvic floor therapist, and she's really a shaman as well. And, you know, holistic pelvic care is around helping women both connect with their pelvis. So a lot of women will come in and say, I just feel disconnected from my body. Well, most of the time you're disconnected from your pelvis, in the tantric world, from your second chakra. And also to help move the blocks of both energy, because, you know, whether you have a uterus or whether you have ovaries, the energetic imprint of those organs live in your body. And there's a lot of trauma You know, this is also like our second heart and our second brain. So all of these emotions, all of the wounds that we've had, both physical wounds and emotional wounds, live here in the pelvic bowl. And so many women have the energy around that area blocked. And so holistic pelvic care is really a way to help unblock some of those energy channels, and also literally to help smooth out some of the adhesions and tissues in the vagina. That's part of the reason why energy is blocked, because the blood is not really completely flowing in the vagina because of all of the adhesions that are formed from just living and having a pelvis and having, you know, children and, you know, all of the weight on it as well. And so there's a part of it that is physical, but just, you know, generally very gentle. It's not about orgasm or pleasure. That's sexological body work. It's a different modality. It's really about helping to open up the channels, as well as the release of blocked energy and often trauma that we hold in this area. And, you know, in certain countries, like I believe it's France and in the Netherlands, they actually, as part of well women care after pregnancy, they actually do this for women,
Right.
which is so important because, you know, the whole pelvic bowl just takes so much pressure and so much trauma happens to it. And this, I think, is really just part of what women should be doing to make sure, you know, we clean our teeth and, you know, we do exercise our body. Well, we need to do the same thing with our vagina as well. It's hugely important.
Right. I totally agree. Thank you so much for doing such sacred work. And I really want to emphasize how important it is to take care of our feminine gems that we hold so much power in, and consciously take care and move stagnant energy and work with the power that they produce, right? Because there is so much power that we can harness, whether we active in sexuality or transmute that energy in other ways, in creativity. Everything comes from that place of creation, from the womb and the fire of the ovaries. That's what fires our passion, and our vulva and vagina. That's the birthing, whether it's physical or spiritual. That's what we birth into the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And tell me, what is a somatic experiencing trauma release? Tell me a little bit more about that.
So somatic experiencing is the body of work created by Dr. Peter Levine. And somatic experiencing is, the theory is that when a trauma happens to us, whether it's a systemic, you know, long-term sexual abuse, which is a lot of what I work with, or whether it's a car accident, right, a one-time incident, that memory of the trauma gets stuck in our body. And our body typically does not have the ability, like we either go into freeze if we don't know what to do and the body gets frozen, and sometimes we go into flight, we actually flee, we can sort of escape. But, you know, those are that's the way in which the trauma actually gets contained in the body, and the body has the memory of the trauma even decades after it actually happened. And somatic experience is a process to help release some of that energy that is bound up in the body. And we do it through a variety of different ways. I mean, it's very body-based. There can be a touch component to it, but a lot of it is just following the body and allowing you to be able, for example, if you were sexually abused and you were held down by a perpetrator and what you wanted to do was kick him, right? I'll start working with somebody and I'll see that the leg starts dangling, like it wants to make a movement. And so what we do is we allow that to happen in a very measured way to be able to allow some of that energy to actually be released. It's a very, very powerful trauma healing modality.
Yeah, you know, it's if we look at the animals in nature, they don't hold trauma in their body because they release it right there and then. They shake it out and off they go. But for us humans, maybe being more complicated beings, we tend to, as you said, either store it in the body or disconnect. So we actually check out of the body. Right, and what happens is that when trauma is stored in the body, it actually takes vital energy to keep it at bay. So it actually consumes energy to be able to store it in the body. And yeah, by doing somatic work, I do breath work, so it works also on same principles. It releases that stored energy that at the time was a survival mechanism. So we could carry on living. So bless that for what it was, but comes a time where when we are adults, that we can release it and we don't have to experience the same experience again, right? Because that was in the past. But accessing those emotions in a safe, guided container, that can really shift all of that.
Absolutely. And you know, in women and men who have been, you know, sexually abused, as you noted, excuse me, one of the most common experiences is dissociation, totally leaving your body, right? As you said, you know, just like checking out. And when you dissociate from an abuse, in an abuse situation, absolutely, it was the best thing that you could do. It was a survival technique, and thank goodness that you had that. But then that memory gets stuck in the body, and so then you want to go and have a sexual relationship with a partner, and all of your body remembers is the dissociation. And so you're checked out during sex as well. So you can't have pleasure, you can't have an orgasm, your body's not responsive, right? That's one experience, or other things. You could also go into, often you can just go into freeze, also a sense of, you know, that's also a type of dissociation, is dissociation. And that's something that will continue, that pattern will continue to happen endlessly until you actually take an action. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand, and I'm sure you see this as well in your work, is that in the beginning of a new relationship, the chemicals from the new relationship energy, the oxytocin and the dopamine, completely override the trauma. Yes. And I get this all the time, like, well, when we first started dating, like I could have sex anywhere, it didn't matter. And then 18 months to 2 years later, all of a sudden things completely shift. And I think people don't understand that that's actually a normal response. It's not that the trauma has been resolved, it's that the chemicals were hiding it. And then once those new relationship energy chemicals dissipate, the trauma is right back there, front and center, even though this is this wonderful person who you adore, who you love, who you feel safe with, at least you think you feel safe with, but your body doesn't.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm sure that so many of the audience can relate to that one. Yeah. I keep hearing those stories again and again and again. Sexual trauma does not just disappear. It needs a conscious work and healing, but it's possible. It's possible at any age. It's possible after any form or kind of abuse. It is possible, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right, and I would love to hear maybe a case study from you of a woman that really moved through that journey from the one side to the other, and if you may share it with us for inspiration.
Sure. Let me think about, I've got so many.
I remember reading so many in your book.
Yeah, I don't remember what I wrote about. I'm thinking more about some of my current clients. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this one because it's an interesting case. Not only did this, and this was a young woman, like 25 or 26 years old. Not only did she experience a lot of sexual abuse as a child, but she also ended up having addiction issues. She was addicted to sex, then she became addicted to food and was binging and anorexic. Then she had, like, I don't believe in love addiction, but she had very unhealthy, addictive relationships with men, right? This was her pattern. And again, this is a very common response to trauma. Addiction is a very common response to trauma. That's typically where we see it. And when she came to me, she was really a mess. She was like in this relationship where she was addicted to this man who was really abusive to her, not physically abusive, but emotionally abusive to her. And she was binging and purging, and she was going through all of this, all of these things. And she also was addicted to sex, like constantly masturbating. And we worked together for a while, and she really shifted, like hugely shifted, and is no longer in that, unhealthy relationship. She's actually sort of put relationships on hold for the moment, which sometimes that is the thing to do. And she's no longer binging or purging. And I was really surprised by this because I'm not an addiction expert, right? I'm a coach, but it was just so clear to me that the somatic experiencing work worked underneath that trauma and really helped her, through that addiction as well. And so I think that was one of the really interesting cases that I had in terms of, wow, when you start working on the trauma, all of these things change, right? The sex addiction changes, the addictive, abusive relationships change, and even the addiction to food was changing, because what do we try to do in addiction? We're trying to fill an empty hole inside of us, right? And it's the trauma that's speaking. And once that gets resolved, we can start to fill that with our own self-love.
Right. I'm so happy that you mentioned addiction, because this is also a big one. As you said, it's trying to fill that empty ghost that never gets filled from the addiction. So it always in a very helpless state of being. And it's really interesting how it's all intertwined together, right? Because our sexual energy is our, and I'm going to repeat it again and again because it's so important that it will sink in. It is our life force energy. And when that got wired with shame, that was a big one that you mentioned. And it can be guilt, disgust, it can be, lots of other anxiety, fear. Then the process is to unwire that connection and rewire it back to the innocent flow of life and pleasure that is our birthright, that we are born with, and
Absolutely.
is so mutated in the collective state of sexuality that we experience in the planet, right? We can see that it's an epidemic. So can you talk a little bit about shame and what is your ways to unshame, to drop shame? Because this is a big one.
Huge. Gosh, shame is like the elephant in the middle of the room, right? Like shame is that, in my book, I call it the nastiest 5-letter word in the universe, right? And it's like, there's so much shame that you can't even admit that you have shame. Like that's how shame is so much a part of us. And shame around sex is just so incredibly prevalent based on just the messages that we received around sex as children and as little girls, let alone, and from the media and religious and cultural institutions, let alone those women who have experienced abuse, where the shame, you know, where they often blame themselves for that experience. You know, I've worked with a couple of my clients in the last 2 weeks, helping them understand that the shame that they felt about allowing, and I'm putting this in quotes, allowing themselves to be abused was actually, you know, it was appeasement. It was their only way to survive, right? And being able to shift from, oh, wow, okay, my ability to appease my perpetrator allowed me to escape the fact that I was being kidnapped, which actually happened to one of my clients, right? Really shifted the whole shame story for her. But shame also has a physical, it shows up in our bodies in a physical way, right? When we feel shame, we go into this very, very contracted, closed off place. And whether we actually do this with our shoulders, I'm doing it, or whether our stomach clenches, or whether our vagina or vulva starts to close up, right? Or we cross our legs, shame prevents us from being able to access our sensations. It prevents us from being able to access our pleasure as well. And so it's just, it shows up all the time. So some of the ways in which we can start to, I used to say banish shame, but I actually feel like, you know, there's that part of us, there's a part of us that has some shame. It's more like accepting the shame and having empathy for that shame that you're feeling. But some of the most powerful exercises or things that you can do is to actually talk about it, right? Talking about it helps to actually normalize it. And I also suggest that you talk about it with somebody, well, obviously you're talking about it with somebody else, but even talking about it like with a group of friends. And in my women's group coaching program, we always have a module on shame where we have an opportunity to share our shame stories. Because once we begin to share our stories, the first thing we realize is, oh my God, I'm not alone. And shame, you know, which is different than guilt, right? Guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad. That's a very, very different perspective. When we start to be able to know I'm not alone, the I am bad starts to really, it starts to dissipate, because all of a sudden we're like, oh, actually that happened to you too. Okay, I must not be so broken. You know, it starts to actually normalize the experience. And that is extremely, extremely powerful. I also will encourage my clients to write about it, you know, to like, and also to personify shame. Make shame a character, right? The more we can take this like heaviness around shame and make it like a cartoon character, which is what happens when you start personifying it, right? Also, it starts to lose its hold on us. And that's what we want to do with shame. We want to be able to allow it to start to lose its hold, but it is insidious. It's like, you know, it's like got tentacles in so many different parts of our bodies, in our brain, in our breasts, in our vagina, like in our heart, like it's everywhere, right? And so it is tricky, but it is definitely something that can be overcome. I mean, I had huge shame, like ginormous amount of shame about my body, shame about feeling broken, all of it. And, you know, I've gotten a lot better. I mean, I feel like sometimes I have a little bit of it, but when I have it, I name it. And that's another tool, naming it, right? Brene Brown, the wonderful, amazing Brene Brown, who has made shame more of a household word, right? Like naming that shame also starts to take it down, right? It starts to lessen the impact of it.
I love it. I love personalizing it and give it a character. That's such a great way to deal with shame, because from my experience, shame is the fear of disconnection. And
Mm.
we all want to feel connected. We want to feel loved and seen. And so that fear of being alienated is part of that big monster called shame. And I so relate to it. I mean, I felt shame my entire life until I completely managed to dissipate it, as you say, working on it consciously, because I've been molested by my stepfather as a child, and I experienced my first orgasm when I was 9 years old
Mm.
by his stimulation of my clitoris.
Mhm.
And so, of course, I didn't know it's an orgasm at that time, but it was just, yeah, it swept me off my feet. And years later, I've realized that that was actually an orgasm. And it wired up my entire orgasmic flow with shame and also guilt and blame. I was blaming myself for allowing it. And then later my mother, when I actually told the story when I was 10 years old and I couldn't carry it on any longer, my mother didn't believe me. And she bailed him out of jail. He was arrested and moved to live with my father. So on top of the shame that I was already carrying, there was this all other aspect of shame added to the story. So shame was a potent resident in my being. It was this cloud that was constantly there overtaking my entire being. And I found that the key to break that grip is vulnerability, is to talk about it, as you said. It's to share it and to show that, you know, we do have our weak side or weaknesses or shadows, however you want to call it. We are not perfect in any way. We are perfect imperfections. And by allowing to be fully seen in our humanity, we completely let go of that shame.
Yes, that's beautiful. And the experience that you had is so common for so many women, right? That same experience of, you know, your body reacting physiologically because your clitoris was being stimulated, right?
Right.
You had no control over that, and your body just had a physiological response, but there's so much shame associated with it. And that's a very, very common experience for women who have experienced childhood sexual abuse.
Right,
And it
because
makes it really hard, right? It makes it
very
hard
Yeah.
to enjoy an orgasm after that without it being coupled with shame.
In fact, for maybe 2 decades, I could only turn myself on with an abusive fantasy. That was the only way, which was perpetuating the abuse, and that was my only way to turn myself on. Otherwise, I was completely numb, I was completely disconnected, and I was really frustrated. Here I was with this man that I adored and loved, and I had to think about an abuser, and it created such a split in my existence. And I managed to, after working on myself for a while, I managed to experience orgasms with a partner, but only through the abuse. And that was, again, perpetuating that cycle of the abuse. It was really, really difficult to deal with it. And it took me quite a while to rewire my orgasmic flow. But
And I think that's a really good point. I mean, 2 points is your experience of, you know, those type of fantasies, super, super common, right? That's a very common experience that women have who have been abused. And there's shame associated with that as well. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually having this fantasy. But what we look at that as, you know, you can look at it as also a way to heal, right? Because in the fantasy, unlike in the real situation, you actually have control. You have taken control, because it's your fantasy, over who comes in and who's, you know, ravishing you or raping you or whatever. So I always think about, like, that is actually a bit of that is actually a repair situation of the abuse at some level. So think about it that way, right? That's a little bit of a mindset shift.
Right.
Yeah, right?
Yes,
And
you're absolutely right, because the fantasies in the years, they shifted. So
right.
so they changed as I was shifting and changing, they also changed.
That's right.
So yeah.
That makes sense. And the second part of that is what you said, which is it didn't happen overnight. Working through sexual abuse and trauma, it is a slow process. There is no quick fix for this. It's not like a car accident where you can go and get like 2 rounds of EMDR and it's rewired your nervous system. It's not like that. It's a much, much slower process. And so like just telling people like it's okay that it's taking a couple of years, because that's what it's going to take, but you will see shifts continue to happen. And then also for people to also see like, yes, it was challenging, but you did it. Now you have a good relationship with your sexuality, and you do have a good relationship with your orgasmic flow, right? So there's a lot of hope. And I think because these type of educational events exist and there's more talking about it, you know, there's even more hope than there was maybe even 10 years ago, because this is no longer like the very, very hidden secret. So, you know.
Absolutely. When I started my healing journey more than 20 years ago, I felt that I could not find the right resource to help me in my journey. And I remember that I went to a Tantra workshop and I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't stop crying the entire time. It was way too much for my nervous system. And I felt that there's a whole gap that needs to be bridged before I can even think of engaging in Tantra work. There was a whole foundation that needed to be processed, and as you said, you know, I needed to release emotions from my body. I needed to cry and wail, and I needed to move and breathe and laugh. I all of it had to come through my body before I could relax and enjoy in the tantric sexuality practice.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense too. And, you know, it's interesting because I've seen it both ways. I mean, I've certainly seen experiences where people, both women and men with a lot of trauma, get really triggered and re-traumatized. And I've also seen at times with a really good trauma-informed, you know, Tantra program, that it can also be very, very healing. So, the more certainly my experience and what I tell people is, if you've had a lot of trauma, you should tell a Tantra teacher that you've had a lot of trauma, and you should ask, is this a trauma-informed program? Do you understand that I may need to slow things down? Will you be able to help me figure out if I'm dissociating or if I'm disconnecting from my body? You know, a lot of trauma survivors actually have a lot of challenges with breath work, right? Because it doesn't feel safe to be in their body. So doing very, very intense deep breathing can totally overwhelm the nervous system and really trigger them as well. I mean, everybody's individual as well, but you know, those are the right questions to be asking to yourself and to teachers or workshop leaders when you consider doing some trauma work. If you have a lot of abuse and you haven't worked on it, even if you have worked on it, those are still the questions that we want to be asking for sure.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about sexual triggers and your experience with it?
In Tantra specifically?
In making love or sexuality, because in my experience, those triggers are also a very important roadmap to healing. So
yeah, I mean, you know, I think everyone experiences sexual triggers in a different way. For some people, it's going to be more of a physical experience. My own personal triggers were primarily physical. my body didn't want to cooperate with what my lover was trying to do. It didn't want to open up. I didn't get aroused. I didn't have an orgasm, and I would be touched and I would go like this, like I would feel my whole body contract. So it became a very physical experience. But other people can be triggered emotionally. There's certainly a lot of emotional triggers around sex, depending upon what your experience has been in the past, right? If you've had all of these negative experiences with sexual partners who do act in a certain way, and somebody does that to you, like that's going to activate another type of trigger as well. So I guess what I would say about sexual triggers is it's very individual. And the more that you understand what your triggers are, like I will sit down with a partner and I will tell them specifically, this is what I know about my body. You know, this is what works for me. If you do this, you know, I'm going to get triggered. You know, if you say something to me, you know, that creates shame. I was with somebody a couple of months ago who I was dating, and he said something and created a lot of shame for me. That completely shut me down, like 100%. My body got shut down, right? So the more we understand about what our own triggers is and what our roadmap is to arousal, the more we're able to convey that to a partner, the less triggered we will get during, you know, the sexual experience. But I think shame is a big trigger for a lot of women. So you tell your partner, you say something negative about their body, you might immediately, you know, shut them down. For some women, you tell them something positive about their body, they don't believe you. That triggers them and shuts them down, right? We're very complicated creatures.
Yeah, right. But you raised a very important piece, and that is about communicating with the partner. That is about normalizing, speaking about sexuality and about our needs and desires and wants, and bring that into the open, bring that into the conversation, and even talking about the abuse and the experience of the past. Because yeah, I found that from my experience, so many women feel shame to talk about it. And of course, it's not something that you need to throw in the first date. But if you are in an intimate relationship with a partner, you want them to hold your hand and go through that healing journey together. And that means a lot. That means that you might be experiencing crying or laughter or any other form of release during sexual activity. And it's important that the partner will know that it's not personal and it's not about them, but it's part of your process, so they can hold that safe space for you.
Totally. I think that's critically important. And that's the mark of whether you have a partner you feel safe with and can trust going on the journey, or whether you have a partner that just is not the right person for you. But I think that's very important because, you know, there's no question if you are the partner of someone who has had sexual abuse, it has an impact on you, and it can have a very big impact on you, right? Because it's going to most likely going to affect the sexual relationship. And so those partners need to be supported, as well as their partner who has also had the abuse as well. And it's really important piece.
Right.
And they can be a huge part of in the right partner, in the right situation, can be a huge part of the healing process. Absolutely.
Right. And that's what will deepen the intimacy and not the other way. So if a partner will turn away and walk from it, then by all means, goodbye, because you are not the right one. It really takes a committed, loving partner to walk this journey. And yeah, I can say for myself, I've been with my partner for 23 years. And he was such an important pillar in my sexual journey, because he had to support me and hold space for me, and there was so much that I had to process. And at times it felt that I'm going one step forward and a few steps backwards. And it's a constant journey. I think that being alive and exploring sexuality is forever. It's forever unveiling and revealing itself and unfolding.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about, I don't know if we were going to bring this on the topic, but I definitely want, there's one thing that I think is really important to talk about when we're talking about sexual abuse and trauma, is that it's not just sexual abuse, right? There is physical trauma that women have, which was mostly what my experience was. I had shame trauma, but I also had physical trauma from surgeries, and from, you know, a lot of women get bladder infections, and then there are procedures related to that. There are physical traumas that we have in our body that cause us to shut down sexually, and it is not talked about very often. When we talk about trauma, we're usually talking about, you know, physical abuse or sexual abuse, but this physical wounding is huge. And you know, we have a lot of traumatic events that happen as part of normal life, such as childbirth. Childbirth is a very traumatic experience for a woman's body. Most of the time, it goes really well and the body knows what to do. But there are plenty of experiences, whether it's an unplanned C-section or an emergency C-section or a huge loss of blood. I mean, I could just go through all of the clients I've had, right? Where what should be a wonderful experience, even though there's still a positive outcome, which is a healthy baby, becomes extraordinarily traumatic for the woman. And she ends up sexually shutting down and doesn't realize what's actually going on with her sexually. And it shows up, you know, I had a client who was traumatized from a gynecological exam in college. And that is not that uncommon either, right? By a physician who wasn't very caring and wasn't very careful and went very fast. And she was already told by her friend that it was going to hurt. So her body was already in this contracted place and she jumped off the table, right? And she had severe vaginismus. Like she couldn't even be penetrated but with a finger. And, you know, so I think this is just a really important piece that we need to be talking more about, and women need to be thinking about this. Breast, you know, mastectomies, hysterectomies, all of these, any type of abdominal surgery not only causes physical issues, adhesions in the body that can cause painful intercourse, can cause the muscles to start to contract for like parts of the body to start to come together like sticky glue, as opposed to there being spaciousness. But also it leaves emotional wounds as well, that the body, just like in a traumatic, you know, abuse situation or a car accident, the body has the memory around. And I just really want to talk about that. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's a really important issue for women. It was the experience that I had, and it took me a long time to figure out how it happened.
Thank you so much for that, and especially with the medical field being so masculine orientated in years of patriarchy, and the way that childbirth happens in hospitals and episectomy and all of that. This is a huge piece. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to wrap up this beautiful, beautiful, enlightening conversation that we have here. And I'm sure it added so much value to our audience. And I know that you also have a very special gift to share with our audience. Can you talk about it?
Yes. The gift that I'm sharing is called a Relationship and Intimacy Blueprint. And in the Relationship and Intimacy Blueprint, you will really start to understand how you became a sexual adult. how what happened to you in childhood has an impact on your sexuality as an adult, and how it may have blocked you from having some experiences that you'd like to have, and some tools, very specific tools, to allow you to begin to unblock some of those issues so that you can have the pleasure that is your birthright.
Wow, it sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that.
You are so welcome. I am so happy to share that with everyone.
And if a woman wants to make contact with you, what's the best way?
Yes, so I work with women, and I work with couples, particularly couples who are struggling in relationships, and I work worldwide, mostly virtually, just like this. And the best way to contact me is through my website, which is powerofpleasure.com, powerofpleasure.com.
I love this name, the power of pleasure. Yes.
And they can purchase my book, Living an Orgasmic Life, through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any other retailer.
And it's such a beautiful book. I really, really, really enjoyed reading it. So yes,
Thank you.
yes, yes. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for putting on this summit, because this is a really important topic that very few people are talking about. So I am really honored and thrilled to be able to participate in it. And thank you for leading us through this journey.
Thank you so much, everyone. And until the next time, ciao.